Hello everyone, my name is Solvashes and welcome to this Threshold video. Today, I will be reviewing the Toliss A321 with the Neo expansion. So, I just wanted to say, before anyone mentions this in the comments, yes, this Toliss review is late, considering that the aircraft was released some time ago. But we here at Threshold figured that it would be worth revisiting since the Neo expansion is a rather major update and is relatively recent. With that out of the way, let's talk about this review. In this review, I will be speaking about the systems and handling, the experience of flying the A321, the sounds, the textures and modeling, some key differences that you can expect between the CEO and NEO variants, and the price, and after that, we will wrap it all together and deliver some final thoughts. I'm really excited to get into this review, so without further ado, let's get started. The Toliss systems are without a doubt where this plane shines. Toliss' website claims that the plane comes with a detailed FMGS with SID stars and airways and performance prediction, as well as secondary flight path, temporary flight path, alternate flight plan, a choice of CFM or IAE engines, affecting aircraft performance and fuel burn, a choice of sharklets or classic wingtip fences, which affects aircraft drag, very accurate FBW implementation, including reversion to alternate and direct law, and detailed systems including fault injection for currently about 90 failures. Whew, that was a mouthful. Through extensive testing, I am happy to report that Toliss has delivered what they have advertised. Here's an example of one thing that I tested. I was able to gather a list of performance differences between the two variants online that I was able to test. For instance, the IAE has a higher idle thrust power and is, generally speaking, a more powerful engine. Toliss certainly delivered here. Swapping engines between an equally loaded plane shows that the IAE moves to an idle crawl faster than the CFM. The higher idle thrust power also reportedly leads to a higher residual thrust on landing, which, after about an hour of touch and goes with both engines, appears to have been modeled nicely by Toliss. Lastly, after completing 2 flights with each variant equally loaded, the IAE burned less fuel than the CFM, confirming that Toliss has correctly modeled the engine to be more fuel efficient on the A321, a characteristic of the variant in real life. The systems of the Toliss A321 are properly advertised, and the developers have done a good job modeling their Airbus A321 after the real plane. My experience flying the A321 was nearly seamless. As previously mentioned, the systems of this aircraft are great, which lead to a seamless experience when flight planning, flying RNAVs and ILSs, and more. But the aircraft fell short in a couple of categories. First, I strongly dislike how Toliss has designed the light switches. Each switch has a pre-programmed order that you cannot change. If you have, for instance, the taxi lights on and you had previously had the landing lights on, you need to completely cycle through again in order to get the landing lights back on. Though this is a minor inconvenience, it only really affects a couple of switches. It is exacerbated by the terrible click spots. I think that other developers have done a much better job with their switches, oftentimes utilizing mouse wheel support and paying close attention to click spots. Additionally, the mouse lags whenever you are near the MCDU. After a few flights, I got so annoyed by this issue that I resorted to using the pop-out MCDU, which is great by the way, to insert my flight plans. Though these are minor inconveniences, in the grand scheme of things, they were certainly things I noticed and they affected me every single flight. However, they are far from a deal breaker and could likely very easily be addressed in a future update. Straight off the bat, I want to make it clear. I do not like the sounds. To me, a plane with good sounds is just as important as a plane with good system depth, and the Toliss does not deliver with their current sounds. First, they are simply sloppy. If you listen closely, you can, with most of their sounds, hear a click or jitter when the sound is being looped. The best example of this is when the flaps are extending, as the click is very pronounced and distracting. For an $80 product, this is unacceptable, especially when these looping issues could be fixed with a maximum of 5 minutes in audio editing software. Trust me, I know, I edit podcasts. Secondly, the sounds are really dry and low quality. Every sound, even the ones that are clearly recorded from the real aircraft, lack depth, texture, and quality. Lastly, they're simply not accurate to the real aircraft. Though, as I mentioned, some sounds come from the real plane, many others do not. The flaps in the cockpit are the most obvious examples of this. The bland sounds of the cockpit are nowhere close to the sounds of the real A321 cockpit, and the flaps are significantly louder and more bassy than the sounds from the real plane. The textures of the Toliss are lackluster at best. A few things I observed that made me come to this conclusion are a lack of diverse PBR, low poly count, low resolution windows and cabin, texture and modeling obscurities, and unmodeled lights. So I want to go into a little bit more detail on 3 of these observations. The first thing I mentioned was a lack of diverse PBR textures. When looking through the normal maps, you can see that they lack a lot of texture. Yes, some rivets are taken into account, but overall there isn't much to give the textures character. You can easily see this when comparing it side by side to other normal maps, such as the Flight Factor A320s. You can see the dirt and grit modeled into the Flight Factor, while there is little to none of that present on the Toliss A321. The next is the low poly count. While the poly count used by Toliss is fine, the lower number of polys shows, especially in the exterior model. This results in the model looking slightly off at angles, since higher polys were not utilized to create a more accurate curve, for example. The easiest place to see this is near the aft of the plane, which from certain angles looks blocky. You could argue that this is to save resources for Toliss's users, but many aircraft developers have gotten away with higher poly counts without much of a sacrifice to frames. The last thing I want to look at are the texture and modeling obscurities. The first is the nose cone, which looks extremely odd. The gap between the main fuselage and the cone is too large, and the aerodynamic lines look more as if they are cuts in the fuselage than lines that come out from the plane. Underneath the right wing, one of the flap fairings is also very strangely textured, and communication with third-party painters reveals that this is an issue that can't even be fixed by them because it has to do with mapping. The parts where the wing is split in order to animate wing flex is clearly visible on the ground, and splits when in the air. There are also many spaces where the model splits, such as near the aft of the aircraft. And this is all tied together by a low resolution cabin with unmodeled windows and unmodeled lights. The textures and modeling appear to have been done rather sloppily, and it shows, especially when you spend time on the outside of the plane. But on the bright side, the cockpit, although it has flat textures, is modeled decently well, and for some will likely make up for the many places the plane falls short. Now that we have covered the package overall, I would like to address some of the differences between the base package and the Neo expansion. The glaring difference between the two packages is that the Neo expansion comes with 2 additional engines, the Pratt & Whitney 1000G and the CFM LEAP 1A, and 3 additional variants, the Airbus A321neo, LR, and XLR. Each variant comes with tuned fuel consumption and weight envelopes, depending on the variant and engine type used. The expansion is properly advertised. Pratt & Whitney cooling cycles are implemented, the single slot in the flaps of the A321 XLR, along with additional changes to reflect the differences between variants and engine types. Since the A321 XLR is not yet in existence though, the fuel consumption, performance, and weight envelopes of this variant are rough estimations based on what we know about the aircraft today. However, Toliss has said that they plan on updating the plane once the performance figures of the XLR variant are known. And through my testing, I have found that Toliss has done a great job implementing the differences between the two variants. The sounds on both the Pratt & Whitney and LEAP are not accurate. They both lack the familiar howl that comes when the airplane is in a takeoff roll, and they both, especially the Pratt & Whitneys, sound nothing like the real planes do at idle. Surprisingly, the LEAP is textured rather well. Unlike many of the other textures, the LEAP's textures take up the entirety of the PNG image. However, the Pratt & Whitneys do not. I think that, perhaps, Toliss's modeler did not do these engines as they are vastly different from the rest of their textures. Both engines have okay models, but they can certainly be improved. Overall, I think that the modeling, textures, and sounds of the Neo engines are passable at best. The assessment for the CEO engines is rather similar. They both lack accurate sounds, and they both have mediocre textures. The easiest example of this is in the IAE's engine cone, which looks dreadful no matter what configuration the engine is in. The modeling of each is very inaccurate, especially the IAE engines, which are too long and thin. I would have really loved for some time and effort to be put into the engine modeling and textures, since they are a crucial part of the aircraft. I think that asking $80 for an aircraft that is, by other developer standards, incomplete is not acceptable. I think that my review would be slightly less harsh, and I think that it would be a lot easier to give Toliss some slack here if they price their aircraft at a reasonable rate. Yes, the systems of the plane are solid and represent the Airbus rather well, but everything else is not to the standard that other developers are holding themselves to these days, and are very easy for the average consumer to notice. So in conclusion, I think that the Toliss A321 and Neo expansion have a lot of potential. With good modeling, texturing, and sounds, the aircraft would really be a game changer for the X-Plane community. However, these issues are rather glaring, and, unless you are flying the plane purely for its realistic systems, will likely detract from your experience with the plane in some way or another. It's my job as a reviewer to tell you everything about the product I am reviewing. Just because I have pointed out the plane's many errors doesn't mean it is necessarily a bad plane. Issues aside, Toliss has done an excellent job with the rest of the plane. I had a blast flying it, and it opens up a new category of routes that have, up until the point that Toliss has released the aircraft, been unseen by X-Plane pilots. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know in the comments section below. Do you agree with my thoughts? Do you disagree with my thoughts? I would love to hear what you have to say. Also, if you like this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing if you'd like to see more content like this. That's all for this video. I hope you guys have enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.